Moving right along. Again, thank you so much for joining us for this webinar on getting started with security operations applications. Hope everyone is doing well, and thank you for being an engaged member of our community. Love to have you here. I'm Sarah Wood, and I work in the outbound product management team within security operations at ServiceNow, and I'll be your host for today's session, along with Andy Oja, who's joining from the SecOps product team as well. And we also have Elizabeth Goquist and Tim Boswell on as subject matter experts to help with any of the questions that you might have that come up. Now, we're not planning to cover any forward-looking statements in today's session, but in case we do, our standard safe harbor notice does apply to this presentation. And so before we get to the agenda today, I just wanted to remind you that, again, we really are here to answer your questions. So please feel free to use the Q&A button in the Zoom controls at the bottom of your screen, and we'll either answer them there or live at the end of the session. And so essentially, no matter where you're at in your implementation journey, so whether you've been using SecOps for years and you're implementing something new, or whether you're brand new to SecOps, we really hope that you'll take something away from this, something new, or have a question answered, whatever it might be. Second, this is recorded, and so we will post that in the community afterwards, and I'll just pop that in the chat. This is also where we have links that are being shared in today's session in case you want to grab them throughout the session. You can actually just take a look at that community post, and they're already all posted there, and the slides and recording will be posted about a week after the fact. And then lastly, at the end of today's session, once we do wrap it up and close out the Zoom, you should receive a quick survey on your screen, which we'd really appreciate your feedback. And we do take time to review that and try to incorporate changes for future events. And there's also a question in there around whether you'd be interested in us following up directly with you on anything related to your implementation or related to your experience with SecOps. So please keep an eye out for that and fill that out if you'd like additional follow-up or support from our team. Now, our planned agenda for the day is here, but again, most importantly, we do want you to come away from this with something, with some questions answered, with some new resources to guide you, really knowing what your next steps are towards your implementation, wherever that might be for you. And our goal is essentially to just support you and provide you with what we think are some of the most critical resources for SecOps folks. So I'm going to lead us through this first part where we're just sort of grounding ourselves in a quick overview of security operations, really useful for new folks, but even useful for people that aren't new, who might not be aware of some of the newer stuff that we have, and some of the resources that are out there. But before we get into that, I will launch our first poll now, which is just looking at finding out what are you planning to implement. So obviously our core applications here are security incident response. We also have vulnerability response. You might be looking at implementing both. You might be not sure at the moment, which is totally fine. Or there might be something else on your mind. So it might be one of our newer solutions. Maybe it's security posture control, threat intelligence security center, Now Assist even. So let us know in the chat. We love to see who's in the audience, what you're kind of looking at. It seems to be a bit of a mixture, lots of people looking at both SIR and VR, which is great. Some unsure, which is totally fine. Maybe after today, you'll get a better sense of what's next on the implementation list for you. We'll give it a couple more seconds there, and then we'll move on. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and just close that out. We do have a mixture, as I said, and you're in the right place. So again, thank you for joining. So again, lots of you might already know about the SecOps portfolio, but we want to do a little bit of an overview. We can really sort of divide the portfolio into two broad areas. So on the left, we have our unified attack surface management and those applications. And then on the right here, we have our security case management and those related applications. So going a little bit deeper on the left side, that's really kind of covering your ability to respond to vulnerabilities across your enterprise. And that includes all attack surfaces and at scale. So that would be your infrastructure vulnerabilities with our core VR solution, your application vulnerabilities with our application VR, cloud and container vulnerabilities and misconfigurations. With configuration compliance, we also have an SBOM solution. We also have operational technology vulnerability response. And then most recently, last year, we launched security posture control, and that's our cyber asset attack surface management solution. And it's really giving you visibility into where you might have security gaps in your environment uh, and more. So exciting stuff. And on the right side is more of your ability to respond to incidents across security functions. And so this is largely achieved with our SOAR solution, security incident response. And within that, we have purpose-built applications for things like data leakages with data loss prevention, incident response, your major security events like your large-scale malware, like your ransomware, with our major security incident management solution. And most recently, we have our threat intelligence platform, which is Threat Intelligence Security Center, where you can, aggregate different threat intel and operationalize it in your environment. We also have released our first generative AI release, which is Now Assist for Security Incident Response last year. And this is powered by Now LLM, which gives you some awesome features to really speed up your incident response. So things like incident summarization, things like automatic generation of resolution notes, and recommended actions for analysts. So really exciting stuff. And again, we'll point you towards some resources to dive in deeper if you'd like to do that. And just a quick deeper look at our security incident response sort of workflow perspective. With SIR, you really unlock a lot of automation for your analysts to be able to respond to incidents faster. So essentially, it sort of starts with integrating your different security and SIM tools that you have, bringing them all into one central system of action to be able to view and prioritize those events and alerts, um, creating incidents automatically, having that native connection to your CMDB within ServiceNow, which allows you to really understand the business context and better enrich your incidents, your security incidents. Also building on that, plenty of integrations in the ServiceNow store so that you can integrate with things like threat intelligence tools to add further enrichment to those incidents, orchestration tools to orchestrate response actions from directly within SIR, along with playbooks to add in a ton of automation and post-incident workflows. And Andy will be getting into a little bit more of the implementation side of this in the next section. But just quickly, for those who are maybe less familiar with what this actually looks like, maybe you're not using it yet, this is the security incident response workspace, and a little flavor of Now Assist here with this screenshot in the front, showing you what that security incident summarization looks like, as well as recommended actions. So again, great solution, one of our core solutions, along with vulnerability response. So we'll move to the vulnerability response side just to take a high level look at that workflow. So this is really giving you visibility and prioritization and automation on the vulnerability side of the house. So similar to SIR, it's all starting with integrating your tools. So your scanners, for instance, setting up those vulnerability calculators and assignment rules to enable the automatic risk scoring of vulnerabilities, the automatic grouping and assignment to the right teams across security, across IT. Andy will get into more detail about this. But again, you've got additional integrations that you can set up with solution recommendations and patch orchestration. There's workflows for things like reassignments and exceptions and deferrals. And this can connect with our integrated risk management solution as well. let's move and just get a quick flavor of what vulnerability response looks like. So this is our vulnerability manager workspace. This is where vulnerabilities come in and they're grouped and assigned to the appropriate teams. And vulnerability managers can set up watch topics to understand the status of important vulnerabilities in the environment that they want to keep tabs on. So we'll move along after that overview just to highlight some of the key resources that you can take a look at to dive more into the knowledge side of security operations and the what. And again, the links to all of these things are in that community post that I shared in the chat. But first of all, we have product documentation. Obviously, very key place to go to find all the latest product information, the latest release notes. So you'll see Yokohama release notes are up there, as well as other helpful content. So things like setup guides and instructions to learn about your entitlements. All of those things can be found in the product doc. And if you're ever curious about setting up specific integrations or technical details, this is a really good go-to place for that. Second, we have our demo and video resources. So there's a few different YouTube playlists that we would recommend. One is the security operations playlist. The other is the Live on ServiceNow playlist, which would host things like this recording. This is a good go-to place to get some of our latest demo videos for new features. So if you're interested in Now Assist, which is our Gen AI offering, you can check that out. You can see a quick demo there to get a flavor of what that looks like. We also have Demo Center, which they regularly schedule demos that you can join and events to see the products in action. So definitely recommend signing up for an upcoming demo. Okay, next up here is Now Learning, which is our training and certification platform. So in Now Learning, you will see hundreds of different courses. And for your benefit, we have curated a list of courses relevant to security operations that you'll see in that community post that's shared. Recently, a lot of these courses, the on-demand ones, have been made free. So definitely check it out if you haven't been there in a while. Create an account if you don't have one, and you'll get access to a ton of free content. There's instructor-led training as well and certification exams that you can take to become certified in both VR implementation and SIR implementation. And there's also different learning paths. So really, really great place to get hands-on and learn about SecOps. One of my favorites, I'm a bit biased here, but our security operations community, this is really a central hub for SecOps users from around the world. Importantly, there's a forum so that you can ask any question you might have. There's people that are getting super technical, super in the weeds in there, sharing scripts and things like that. So great place for that sort of thing. Also a great place for people to get a sense of where do I start? We have a getting started guide in there. Maybe you want to join events, you want to join webinars. This is really your go-to place. And most recently, we have released a resource library where we're really trying to make it easier for you to find what you need in the community. So we're organizing it by product area and by general topic. So check that out. That can be sort of your first go-to place for any additional resources that you might need. And you can subscribe, which is a great option too, if you don't want to miss any events or articles and blogs and things like that. Okay, the last one that I'll highlight here before we move on is the developer site. So this is our developer ecosystem, which is a really great resource for your more technical team members, but it's also open to all levels of individuals. So there's a lot of technical documentation. It's a place where people can sign up for the free developer program as well to be able to collaborate with other ServiceNow developers and to get access to a personal developer sandbox instance where you can download and test out different ServiceNow apps and experiment with the Now platform. So another great resource to highlight. now that we have that overview and we have that sort of list of resources to get familiar with security operations, we're going to switch gears and get a little bit more deeper into the implementation side of things. So I'll be passing it off to my colleague Andy, but first we will launch our second poll here, which I will get ready right now. There we go. So again, we're always interested in hearing where you're at. So this is looking at where are you at in your implementation journey? So are you looking to implement now or in this quarter? Are you looking to implement later in the year? Do you not really have any plans yet? Or is it something else? So let us know in the chat and love to hear from you. We'll keep it open for a little bit longer as we've still got some responses coming in. Okay. It'll probably end it there. It looks like it's slowing down. Most people implementing now or this year. Some people in the other buckets, they're kind of interested to hear from you. So a couple people in the chat are just saying they've already implemented, but they want to explore how they can better leverage things. So it's great. Need a lot of more maturity, but already on the journey of implementation. Great. You're definitely in the right place. I hope you'll get some really good insights here in Andy's part. Andy, I will pass it off to you. I'm going to advance the slide here for you.
Thank you, Sarah. Hey, everyone. All right. So when we think about our SecOps implementation journey, to start, there are a number of paths that we can explore. We can leverage within ServiceNow, we have our own team of professionals, and that's what we call our expert services team. And typically, an implementation will involve, a requirements gathering workshop. We have a business process consultant conduct that, and then we have technical consultants actually take those requirements and do the configuration, hands-on keyboard work. We also have implementation partners that typically run in the same structure. We have some customers that, of course, have done their implementations themselves through self-implementation. If you're earmarked to go down that path, as Sarah mentioned, we strongly encourage and recommend that you take a look at our training, especially as the on-demand training has been opened up to be free. We have the foundational training, we have the implementation training, so those are definitely some good resources. And we also have a bit of a hybrid model where we have a co-delivery. So you may have an implementation partner that is driving and they're collaborating with someone from the ServiceNow expert services team. And we also, there is another model that we sometimes see, which is an advisory model. So you may be self-implementing, you may be driving hands-on keyboard, but you have a resource where we're advising you, right? Keeping you on track, giving you guidance on best practices. And as we think about that implementation journey, and this applies to whether you're starting off with vulnerability response or you're starting off with security incident response, or potentially both, right? Where we see success is in a phased approach. So looking at this from establish our foundation, and we move into a crawl, walk, run. And there are different capabilities, different integrations, different workflows that you may look at throughout this journey. It tends to start off with, setting the foundation, making sure the platform is established, and that is the ServiceNow platform. And then looking at, well, what are our goals, right? What are we trying to achieve and accomplish? And that would drive you towards which particular ServiceNow store application we're going to start with. And from there, there are going to be some key configurations, right, that unlock value throughout this phased approach and this journey. First, we'll start with vulnerability response. And here we have what we call our maturity model. We tend to see customers, they have vulnerability scanners, they're assessing their environment, but potentially they're putting those results, into manual efforts, things like spreadsheets, files, emails, things like that. And there tends to be, a lack of visibility, a lack of what are we doing? Who's got the ball? Who's taking action? And as we start to bring this data and this process into ServiceNow, number one, we establish a single system of record, right? A one-stop shop. We can start to see who's doing what, right? What work have we assigned to different teams? And we start to automate the collection of that data through those integrations. We also have different flavors of vulnerability response, as Sarah pointed out. We have host infrastructure vulnerability response. Think of scanning your environment, right? Your network. You might be looking at servers, appliances, workstations, printers, etc. We also have cloud container vulnerability response, which allows us to bring in vulnerabilities on cloud-based images as well as runtime cloud images. We have application vulnerability response, which helps us look at static or dynamic assessment tools, right? And bringing in those findings into ServiceNow. And we also have configuration compliance, which allows us to take a look at how are we doing with our hardening settings, right? And our policies, controls that we've established. Are we meeting the goals that we've defined? Within that first phase, we're also looking at alignment with CMDB, right? So we're trying to measure where are we at with CMDB? What data can we consume within VR, right, to meet our goals with vulnerability response? As we progress through the maturity, right, in the second phase, that's where the additional configurations and the automation starts to kick in. So automating the assignment of the findings as we bring them in, putting some prioritization and some goals, some target dates for remediation, aligning to what we call our deferral or an exception process, right? How do we handle vulnerabilities that we can't address? Maybe there's a business reason we need a little bit more time, right? That is what we call our exception process. And tying into our enterprise, ITSM change management process. So as we make changes to the environment to reduce our risk, ensuring that we're following the formal processes that we have, and then aligning, the vulnerabilities on an asset, right? It may be a server, a database system, but starting to align that to the business, right? And speaking in the language of the business and business services. As we further expand our maturity, we may see more enriched risk scoring and prioritization. We have sources like CSEC-Kev, exploit EPSS, Shodan exploit enrichment. There's a lot more integrations that we can look at. We also have vulnerability crisis management and emergency response. This allows us to better respond to things like zero-day vulnerabilities or very high-profile vulnerabilities like your Heartbleeds, your Log4j. And then we can start to look at integrating with risk. So GRC or IRM, integrated risk management. We can look at continuous monitoring. So where we have vulnerability findings, right? Establishing those indicators and visibility, along with integrating with the policy and exception module, where we can use the risk exception process from IRM. We also have orchestration capabilities, and this is specifically for initiating and scheduling patches, right, with certain upstream tools. And then, as Sarah mentioned, we're really excited about security posture control. And this is where we can start to look at assets and visibility from existing tools that we have in the environment. Are we missing certain controls? Do we have certain controls in place that may help us augment the risk of those vulnerability findings and help us better prioritize? And next, for security incident response, in a similar fashion, right? We may have a SIM solution. We may have alerts coming from disparate tools. And we tend to see customers, starting off typically with email, right? Maybe spreadsheets, but usually email. And as we start to bring in those alerts from your detection tools, your threat response tools, we establish that single system of record in ServiceNow. And we start to look at automating the collection of those alerts into security incident response. We start looking at prioritization and assignment. We may have a tiered structure in our security operations center. We may have teams that pick up the work initially, right? And we try to map to that. We start taking a look at metrics, right? How are we doing with time to respond, time to close, and then measuring that process with reports and dashboards. Further along in the maturity in level two, we can leverage threat intelligence. So within security response, as we start to look at objects like indicators of compromise on IP objects, file hashes, right? URLs, domains. We can start gathering insights from external tools to help us better prioritize those security incidents. We also then look at automation. So you may have heard us talk about playbooks. Playbooks in the modern era are done with Workflow Studio, and that is using what we call Process Automation Designer. So we do provide a number of playbooks today off the shelf. You can leverage those, you can extend them, you can learn from them, and create your own. Excitingly, we also have our Now Assist for security incident response. So putting the AI wrapper around certain things like summarization, recommended next steps, and many more capabilities to come. We also have MITRE ATT&CK. So we can start to look at number one, just mapping certain tactics and techniques. We can start to look at mapping our detection coverage, and the goal being better prioritize, right, what we're responding to as those alerts come in. And last, on the orchestrated level three, more artificial intelligence here. This one using predictive intelligence, right? Where might we want to better focus our efforts? Automation. So we have certain orchestration capabilities, and this is where our SOAR capabilities shine, right? So we have containment activities. We can integrate with tools like Microsoft Exchange. We can isolate endpoints. We can remove malicious emails from mailboxes and more. We also have major security incident management. Think of that as all hands on deck, right? There's a very serious security alert. There's a very serious incident or event that happened. We may need to kick off a bridge, right, with all the teams across the enterprise, all hands on deck. That is that elevated major security incident management. We also have our new offering, which is Threat Intelligence Security Center. And think of that as our true threat intelligence platform. You can curate, you can manage your threat intelligence data, put your confidence ratings on it, and you can start, operationalizing your threat hunt use cases. It's a new offering there. And lastly, we have the ability to respond to what we call data incidents. So data loss prevention is another capability we have here. We can look at responding to situations where we have data leakage, sensitive data being uploaded to cloud environments, policy violations and that sort. When we think about our implementation, let's start off with vulnerability response. There are some common themes that we want to start thinking of, some things that we want to start planning. Typically, we're going to start off with making our integrations, bringing in some of the data, getting a taste of what that data looks like. And the next thing we're going to start to do is apply some of those configurations we talked about, right? Things like assignment, uh, prioritization with risk score calculators, and how are we going to operationalize this? How are we going to work with the remediation teams? And this is a bit of a what we call iterative process, right? So we start small, we get a taste of the data, make some configurations, and iterate forward. We're then going to look at things, core processes like our exception management, our change management. How do we measure this process, right? From a strategic top level view and also from a tactical view at a more deeper level. And then, of course, planning for a successful go live. We have some additional insights, one step below this. And the goal of this slide here is to really illustrate what are some of the activities we're doing, what's happening and where is this happening, right? So first thing we start off with is the ServiceNow store apps, right? To get our applications in, to also get the integrations going. For VR, we have foundational integrations, for example, with NIST and VD to gather the CVEs, the vulnerability data. We can also start to bring in exploitable vulnerabilities from CISA Kev, right, and many more foundational ones. And then as we start to bring these in, right, we have assets that are coming from the scanners. Our goal is to start to align with what we have in CMDB. From there, we start to slice and dice. So we can start to say, what are my flavors of vulnerabilities? Where should they be assigned? How do we handle these particular flavors? How do we prioritize these vulnerabilities? So we can introduce tailored configurations. So you may know where your crown jewels are. You may know which vulnerabilities you want to focus on first, and those can all be implemented as part of tailored calculators. From there, we look at packaging up what we call the units of work, the remediation tasks that ultimately get assigned to those remediation teams. This is really the start or the core plumbing. And next, we have some of the additional configurations to plan for. Number one, right? How do we put a timeline, a target date, right? So based on those vulnerabilities coming in and our risk appetite, right? Should you remediate in 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, and so forth? We've talked about those processes, right? Integration with change and ITSM, establishing our exception management process, right? What do those approval rules look like? Who approves? Do we need multiple levels of approval? And we also have what's called data management. So over time, we may start to see data age out as stale, right, based on what we're bringing in. This is especially true when we have ephemeral, cloud, non-persistent assets. There tends to be a cleanup activity. So that's what we call our stale record capability there. And then putting some monitoring around this process with reporting. So we have a lot of great reports that we ship baseline, standard reports, which are what's the situation right now, along with performance analytics, or what we call PA, which is trending. So I can start to see over time, week over week, month over month, how are we doing? Similarly, for security incident response, we have some general themes. Typically, we start with looking at what are our core user personas. So we may have our SOC analysts, our core incident responders, right? Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3. We may have managers. We may have our forensics team, right? This can vary per implementation, but we start with really defining who are the key personas in our response process. Then we start to look at our integrations. And the goal is really, we start bringing in data from specific tools. We also potentially might earmark what we call our user-reported phishing capability as well. This is an iterative process as we start to bring in that data and really start to look at some of the core configurations, and we're going to get into that there. And it's really important that we start thinking about not just the security teams that are primarily handling security incidents and cases, but what are the teams that they work with? So if we think about a security incident, we may have to work with the help desk team, right, to re-image a workstation, a network team potentially to start looking at isolation, blocking IPs, blocking malicious connections, the team that manages our endpoint detection tools to block certain file hashes from executing. And we got to start thinking about how to involve these external teams, right, in that process. We want to start thinking about reporting and then planning for our successful go live. This is a click into this a little bit further. So as we talked about, number one, really establishing those personas and the groups and what they're going to be doing with our case management tool, getting the integrations going with that, what we call the ServiceNow store applications. And then as we start to think of, well, how do we start categorizing our security cases? We need to think of a language that resonates with the security teams, but it's also good to think about reporting, especially early on. So as we start categorizing, as we start prioritizing, think about how are we going to track our security incidents over time in a language that's meaningful to the business and our response teams. We can start to look at those playbooks, right? This is really where some of that value starts to come in. Playbooks are, think of them as repeatable steps. We can have integrations in those playbooks. We can have things like checklists and screenshots and guidance in those playbooks. And the goal is to have repeatable response processes. So some common playbooks could be, here's our playbook for phishing. Here's our playbook for malware or ransomware, and so forth. And then how do we start measuring this process? So things like SLAs and service level agreements, starting to put some boundaries on time to respond, right? Time to acknowledge, time to close, measuring that process with metrics and more. The next, this is what we call the core plumbing, right? And then this is an addition to that. We have a knowledge-based capability, right? And this exists as part of the ServiceNow platform. But the knowledge base can allow us to store things like standard operating procedures, tips and tricks, cheat sheets, contact lists, right? If you get called out in the middle of the night, who do I call for certain flavors when I need help? We can then look at notifications, things like certain when do we tie in with our ITSM incident management? How do we request work from external teams? We have a capability called post-incident review, PIR. So as we start to close certain flavors of security incidents, especially ones that are, high impact, high business impact, what are some of the key questions that we should be asking? And how do we want to embed what we call our feedback loop? So if we know that we have potential blind spots or we need to improve something in the process, ensuring that we're capturing that data, right, through those post-insert reviews. Similar to VR, right, we want to monitor this process with reporting. We have the standard reporting, right? How many critical security incidents did we close this week? And then we have the performance analytics, the trending, right? So how many incidents were closed as false positive, maybe week over week, month over month, right? In a trending fashion. And for our orchestration capabilities, our SOAR capabilities, as I mentioned, we have our threat intelligence integrations, right? So imagine a security analyst opens up a security incident, and this came from our SIM tool. We can set the stage with the enrichment from threat intelligence, like this file hash was known to be malicious based on virus total, right? And similar flavors of integrations. They don't have to click anywhere. They don't have to copy and paste and go to external tools. We want that enrichment to be there as they're working within ServiceNow. On the orchestration, so we have orchestration capabilities that work more in the contain phase, right? So things like endpoint detection tools, orchestration with email, so like Exchange Online, Exchange On-Prem. Who else got this malicious email, right? And maybe even taking it a step further with isolating that malicious email. There's a feature you may hear of called citing search. So if we have a particular object like a malicious IP, we can initiate a search against certain log stores or SIM solutions and say, hey, where else have we seen this? Has this IP address been seen in our proxy logs and other activities for your investigations? And lastly, here we introduced it, user-reported phishing. So we do have a pretty slick workflow. Think of as your users are reporting those suspect or potentially malicious emails, we can wrap a process around that and help speed up your response to those investigations. There are some resources. So I think, Sarah, these are going to be in the links that we share. Partner Finder, right? So how do you get access to partners that are certified, that are experienced in implementing these solutions? And maybe there's particular regions of interest, right? But it's a good start to seeing who's out there, who's seasoned, and where you may want to start from. We have our own internal team at ServiceNow, the expert services team. Again, they can do many things. They can be hands-on keyboard. They can do the process consulting side, the requirements gathering to the delivery. And they also do the co-delivery model that we talked about as well. Now Create, this is a fantastic resource. So we have information such as our process guides. That's probably where you want to start from if you haven't taken a look at those. Those talk about what is this application? What is vulnerability response? How is it meant to be used? Where should I start thinking about aligning our processes with what is ServiceNow suggesting we take our journey down? We also have other material like the recommended implementation sequence. As you've probably seen, there's a lot of applications out there, a lot of moving parts. This gives you a little bit more prescriptive guidance on how to go about your journey. We also have what's called our starter user stories. Think of those as requirements, right? What are some common requirements that we see? How should we start capturing, the most important requirements and move along with our journey in quick fashion?
All right. Excellent. Thank you so much, Andy. That was super informative. We're going to take some time now in our final section to turn our attention to sort of the why piece. So, why implement now? What kind of value are you looking to achieve? And so, as with the other sections, we will start off with a quick poll. And in this poll, we're looking at what are your desired business outcomes? What are your top desired business outcomes? So, there's just a few of them listed here. Accelerating response to security incidents, accelerating response to critical vulnerabilities. Those are just examples. Maybe it's reducing your security incident resolution effort, maybe reducing your attack surface. Um, Whatever it might be, let's hear from you. So great responses coming in. Thank you so much. Interest across the board, which is no surprise since it's a multi-select here. I mean, depending on where your initial focus is, you might really be interested in all of these in this phase of your implementation. So thank you. And again, feel free to share in the chat if you have other things that are top of mind. And another quick reminder too that our Q&A is open and active, so feel free to put your questions in there. All right, I'm going to wrap that one up and share it so you can sort of see that there's a lot of interest across the board there. So Andy spoke about, making, your goals, figuring out your goals as a first step towards implementation. So we do want to spend a little bit of time here. We talked about different types of business outcomes in that poll, and really the good news here is that you can ultimately achieve all of those things that you're looking to achieve. It just depends on your priorities and your order. And there was a question in the Q&A about, hey, do I need to follow this specific maturity model? And the answer is no. You don't have to complete one step before going to the next step. So your journey on implementation is really tailored ultimately to your environment. And so, as Andy pointed out, we have the Partner Finder, which is a really great resource to find skilled implementation partners who can really help you tailor your journey towards your environment, towards your needs, and towards the business outcomes that you're looking to achieve first. And so, I do like flashing up this slide just to give you a sense of the fact that you can get to these outcomes. And our customers, our real customers, have gotten to these outcomes within just 6 months of going live. And so things like analysts closing almost 2 times the number of security incidents on average just after 6 months of using security incident response. So really, really great results. And then on the vulnerability side, again, with efficiency, cutting that mean time to remediate a vulnerability in half in just 6 months. And so these are typical customers. We have best in class customers that are achieving even more. And of course, with our release of Now Assist for security incident response last year, we're looking at even greater results. So lots to be achieved with our solution. And we usually, like to talk about customer case studies, and we've got customer stories linked after this, but at ServiceNow, our security team internally is customer zero. So they use our tools, we collaborate with them. And so internally, the security team moved from using manual and labor-intensive processes to respond to their vulnerabilities to using vulnerability response. And so they achieved really, really great results. 99% accuracy in assigning vulnerabilities, very high SLA attainment, and huge gains in productivity. So I always like to kind of highlight what we're doing internally. And on the security incident response side, similarly, internal security team at ServiceNow has gained a lot of value. So lots of cost savings in terms of staff and hundreds of hours saved. And really, ultimately, this is sort of to drive home that point that we are active users of our solutions, and we do continue to keep adopting security operations solutions and reaching excellent outcomes. So now getting to those results, of course, depends on setting your vision and setting your outcomes. So it's a really key first step in your implementation. And so these are just some of the examples of the types of outcomes that you may choose to focus on and prioritize in different phases of your implementation. So many customers will initially select one or two outcomes that relate to their key challenges and prioritize those initially, and then be able to select appropriate metrics that will measure their progress. And as Andy mentioned, there's a number of really useful resources out there on Now Create that include, outcomes and metrics as well that you can reference. And there's an article here that's shared in that post where you can get another sort of perspective on this. So a couple of other key resources that I did want to highlight as well here. We have ServiceNow Impact. And so this is a value acceleration solution, and it's designed to really maximize the value that you get out of your investment with ServiceNow. There's a ton of different packages with different offerings. So in terms of sort of the total package and the full range of offerings, includes things like having a designated squad, having value recommendations, additional technical support, different discounts on certification and expert services. And so if you're interested in more about ServiceNow Impact, if you don't have Impact and you want to learn about it, reach out to your account executive or your customer success manager. And then I talked about customer stories. If you want to get more information on customer stories that have gone live, you can check out servicenow.com here on the customer story page. And this will just give you a glimpse into some of the success and outcomes that our real live customers have had with security operations solutions. So you can just filter it by security operations products, and you'll be able to take a close look at some of those customers. Okay, so we are coming up to the end of the session. Again, I did share earlier the post with all of the links. This is just another sort of summary of what the top resources are. So again, you can access that in the community. More resources, I know it's really a summary of everything we've talked about, but you'll have access to these slides in the community within about a week. I do want to call some attention to an exciting event that we have coming up in October. And so if you're familiar with our Connect event last year, which was an event for security operations customers, this year we are integrating it with risk. So we're having an integrated customer event for risk and security operations customers at our headquarters, October 14th to 16th in Santa Clara. And really, this is an opportunity for customers to come together to network and learn from each other and share best practices, select from a range of different breakout sessions across risk, across security, and combined tracks. And we're hoping to have, or we're aiming to have, over 300 customers in attendance. We will have some sponsoring partners as well that you can interact with. You can scan the QR code if you want to learn more and register. Again, at this time, the registration is limited to security operations and risk customers of ServiceNow. But yeah, we'd love to have you there. Okay. Last thing here, this is a live on ServiceNow webinar. So check out future live on ServiceNow events in the community by going to this link at the QR code. Leave it up there for a second. We've got a few minutes here, so I'm just going to take a peek at Q&A. I see that questions have been answered for the most part here, so do check it out. You should be able to see what other people have asked and get some answers. I did call out one about the maturity models and how that's more of a guide. I'm just going to take a look to see if there's others that might be worth calling out. I think this one is interesting. Can you implement SIR without ITSM? So great question. And Elizabeth has answered that one. So you can definitely do that. As Elizabeth mentions, the CMDB is commonly built out with ITSM, so you do not need to have that. It certainly helps, but check out those answers in the Q&A. I might spend a second, since we've got a few more minutes, feel free to drop additional questions in the Q&A if you do have any. What I will say is something I think is so critical during the implementation is the partner finder. So I would not mind doing a small tour of the partner finder for those of you less familiar with it. So let me just pull that up for a moment here. So partner finder, I'm going to share it in the chat. If you are looking for an implementation partner, you can filter this right down. It's really step by step. You can look at all regions, you can separate it out by region. And then you can really narrow in on the type of expertise you want your implementation partner to have. And this is so, so critical. You really want to ensure that not only your implementation partner, but the specific individuals on your implementation are skilled in either security incident response or vulnerability response, depending on where you're at with your implementation. So really, really important that you have that. And so you'll get a list. There's hundreds of them. And what's really nice is when you click in to a partner in the partner finder, you can actually open up their profile and you can see specific metrics on their implementation. So CSAT, you can see the type of partner they are, their specializations. And then if we keep going down, you can see product line achievements. So where they have skilled implementers and deployments, you can actually see the number in terms of VR and in terms of SIR. So really, really important step when you're implementing security operations. It is specialized, so it does really require skilled implementers. And as Andy talked through the different options, if you're doing a self-implementation, you can get those skills as well using Now Learning and all of the resources that we've shared. To the panelists, any questions that we want to call out as we wrap up? Let's see. I think we sort of covered it. We'll give them another minute in case anyone wants to drop any questions in, and I'll pop open my community page. This is security operations community that we keep talking about. You've got the resource library linked here. You've got a list of events. This is great if you want to register for upcoming events. We have our office hours coming up in March. It's March 25th. So that's an open forum that you can join and ask questions live. We have these sessions getting started and office hours running monthly, and we are introducing APAC hours in April. So for anybody or any colleagues of yours that are located in the Asia Pacific region will have more friendly hours for those folks coming up. I think that is sort of all I wanted to call attention to. Um, as I mentioned, when we do close out the webinar, there'll be an opportunity to give us some feedback. So please do use that. And if you want us to follow up on anything specifically with you, you can leave your email address as well in the final question of that. Okay. I will move us right along here. And again, I just want to thank you all so, so much for taking the time to join us today. I hope you've learned something. I hope you've taken away a new resource. And yes, please join us at office hours coming up at the end of March or in one of the following months. We'll wrap it up for today. Thanks, everyone.